Okay, hi folks. For those of you who don't know, my name's Chris Bentley and I'm a teacher for over 20 years. So today's session is predominantly aimed at all those students who are taking GCSE History, Edexcel grades 9 to 1. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to focus particularly on Henry VIII and his ministers, but it's basically going to be a way of really helping you in terms of your revision. And I always have students tell me that they get kind of overwhelmed by the content of History GCSE, so hopefully this is really going to help you. So just to give you the heads up, we also teach these units. We do Russia, we do Edexcel, GCSE, the history of medicine through time, and we do the Cold War. So I can't reiterate enough that the principles that I'm going to show you are not just applicable to this particular topic, they're applicable to all these topics, so hopefully it will really help you in the whole scheme of things. So the first thing to remember is, without wishing to teach you to suck eggs, is you've really got to familiarise yourself with the content of the overall unit. So this is Henry VIII and his ministers, and the different subtopics will be highlighted on the contents page, right? The examiners can only draw the exam questions from these particular topics. So what I'm going to do today is give you a technique for getting to grips in a fairly simple way with the content of these individual topics. So this is really the starting point for you. Just to add to that, as a really good tip, so for example, we might be focusing in on Henry VIII and his relationship with Wolsey and how significant Wolsey was. I would always recommend, at the end of the chapter, you would always see these recall quizzes. So particularly for revision, I go to that first. You need to make sure that you understand the basics. And as you're going through this, if you don't know the answers to them, then that's where you very quickly need to go back through the chapter and to familiarise yourself. That's really important. That's almost like the basis for the knowledge of what you're going to be finding out. So, as you can see, for Henry VIII and his ministers, broadly speaking, it's divided into these three principal topics. Now, you've kind of got to do the maths, even though it's a history exam, is if you're very knowledgeable about two of these topics for the exam and fairly knowledgeable about the third, that's still going to put you in a really good stead for getting that 60-70% plus in the overall exam. So that should help you straight away. You don't need to be the be all and end all of knowledge on all these topics. Even me as a history teacher, I won't know, and I'm being completely honest with you, necessarily the detail, the dates, etc. of every single topic. Of course, I've taught it for a long time, so I've got familiarisation with it. So aim really to become very knowledgeable in at least two and have a third topic as your backup topic. So we know for Henry VIII and his ministers, we basically got a unit on Henry VIII as a king, his relationship with Wolsey, the role that Wolsey played in his reign. Then the next subtopic moves on to that of Cromwell, and finally it's a big topic on the Reformation. Now the key is this: what you want to try and do is get in the mindset of an examiner. The examiners on this particular paper, there are three types of questions. The first question is only worth 4 marks, and it's going to basically be asking you to recall information about a particular aspect. So it might be very specific. It might say, what are the key features of the amicable grant? But that is not the big hitter. The big hitters are the next two questions, the 12 marker, the explain why, and the final question, which I'll come on to in a minute, which basically gives you a statement and asks how far you agree. If we go for this approach, it will prepare you really well for the exam, because the examiners for those next two big questions basically focus on why and the consequences of it. So all I'm going to do is, when I'm looking at my first topic, I'm going to do an overview revision sheet, which very much focuses on why, for example, Wolsey came to power, what happened when he was in power, and the consequences. Now, into that, really, it's why did he fail? Why did he fall? And this is what you constantly got to remind yourself when you're revising. Don't try and learn every single aspect of the topic. Focus in on basically these three broad components. Why did it happen? What happened? And the consequences. Now, you're going to find in your text as well that it won't always necessarily fit into these nice three sections. But look at the text in bold. And that will be the focus for the questions. Remember what I said at the start, examiners can only ever ask you questions specifically about the content. So I'm going to show you how to do that in terms of a revision sheet in a second, but that's what you need to do straight away. Not, I'm just going to learn everything in the text about Wolsey. I need to think specifically of the nature of the types of questions that I'm going to get in the exam. Why did Cromwell or Wolsey come to power? What happened and why did they fall? So all I do is I'm going to replicate that for the unit on Henry VIII and Cromwell. Why did Cromwell, this minister, come to power? What did he do when he was in power as one of the Henry VIII ministers? And ultimately the consequences again and the results in terms of why he fell from grace. Okay, so we're replicating that. The final unit for Henry VIII is on the Reformation. Now remember, the Reformation, the key is in the word reform. This is basically a challenge against the Catholic Church. People are unhappy for a number of reasons in terms of the dominance of the Catholic Church at this time in history. So they are seeking to reform it. And I'm just going to add to that to remember that those people who basically were protesting against the Catholic Church were known as Protestants. Okay, so that's a little bit of background knowledge for you. So I'm going to revise this topic on the Reformation. What am I going to do based on what I've just said? Well, I'm going to play it smart. I'm going to go to the section here, which is the third section in my text, and I'm going to focus on the key areas of that text to revise. Not all of it, just the key areas. So looking at that, I would suggest to you, if you're doing this as a unit, you've got to be knowledgeable about the dissolution of the monasteries. You've got to be knowledgeable about the Pilgrimage of Grace and the break with Rome. This might be the unit that you become the absolute expert on, and then you have the other two as a backup. It's entirely up to you. How do I break this down? I do exactly the same as I did for the other two topics. The dissolution of the monasteries. Why did that happen in the first place? What actually happened? And the consequences. If I can learn, even in a simplistic way, those aspects, that's going to cover me for any exam question that's going to be targeting the dissolution of the monasteries. I would repeat that for the Pilgrimage of Grace. The break with Rome is slightly different. Why, what, and to an extent, consequences. And this is the format that I'm basically going to be adopting. Okay? So I taught my students this approach, and this is what they've come up with. So, and I promise you, this is literally what was done in about half an hour. No distractions, no social media. Just really get yourself a real good quality kind of felt pen. Sometimes you can use a Sharpie. And then with this approach, I'm targeting, for example, the Pilgrimage of Grace. So can you see here? This is almost like my overview of what I've got to do. And today's session, for me personally, if I'm doing the exam, I'm studying on the Pilgrimage of Grace. There's a lot to learn, but I want to simplify it. So can you see here? I've done why. Why did the Pilgrimage of Grace happen? What happened? And the consequences. And I've broken it down very, very simply. So for why, the text would suggest you need to look at economic, political, social and religious. Now, be smart, think again, look at this. If we go to the big hitter question, which is the third question on this particular paper, the 16 marker, Wolsey's failure to plan an annulment of Henry's marriage was the main reason why he fell from power in 1529. How far do you agree? Remember with this question, they're going to help you. They're going to give you 2 bullet points. But if you really want to access the higher levels, you've got to come up with information of your own. If I've done this approach, this prepares me for this. Look, Wolsey's failure to gain an annulment of Henry's marriage was the main reason why he fell from power. Well, I've studied why, I've studied what happened, and I've studied consequences. And I might have done the consequences, basically, I've done all this information on one small sheet. So I can think, well, what third factor am I going to be talking about? Because I looked at consequences. I looked at reasons as to why Wolsey fell. So I might be drawing on the unpopularity of the amicable grant, or I might be specifically targeting the influence of the Anne Boleyn's family. But because I've taken this approach, it's pretty much prepped me for this question. And the great thing about this question is you don't have to be incredibly knowledgeable to get into and start to transgress into level 3 category. Again, I've got the basis of the information for doing that. So I put this into practice with my students. I gave them this kind of approach, remembering that you don't need to be an expert in all of them. We've got 3 principal topics. I'm going to target at least 2 that I'm very knowledgeable in this fashion. And this is what they came up with. So they did sheets like this. The dissolution of the monasteries. Can you see how the format follows the same? Causes, what happened, consequences. If I get a big hitter question, the 16 marker, which are the ones that really count on the dissolution of the monasteries, what question can it ask? Well, in effect, it could basically say, to what extent do we agree that Cromwell's commission of 1535 was the principal reason for the dissolution of the monasteries? Discuss. Well, again, I've cited different reasons that I can begin to draw on. So can you see how effective that would be as a kind of methodology for revising? We've got other ones here, look. This is on the break with Rome. Where does this fit in? Here. So this student has opted, they're going to go big on the Reformation and they're targeting the break with Rome. So they've got here, why did it happen? What happened? Consequences. I'll show you just one more, just to show you I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes or pretend in any fashion. Here's another one. Cromwell. This student's going big on Cromwell. Again, rise to power. Can you see that? Why did he come to power? What did he do? And basically consequences again. Now what I've done with my students is they principally all targeted one of these, and we kind of distributed it so that everyone would have, when they've done their sheet, we're basically going to get them all together, we'll photocopy them, and they're all going to have this pack. Now, what I'm not saying for one moment is that this is going to be enough to get you, say, a grade 9. But this approach, in terms of giving you the basics to work on in an exam, is certainly going to enable you, I would suggest with my experience, to start targeting that, certainly high C's going into B's. Have you got the overall understanding in terms of what's going on? Well, this would be the approach to do it. Okay, so that's pretty much it from me, folks. I hope you found that useful. Listen, it's difficult times and we all appreciate that, and anything that you can do to simplify this process obviously is going to be some help to you. Don't sweat over the small stuff. You cannot really afford in many respects to become the expert in everything. Use simple methods like this to enable to clarify the basics of all these topics, and that should do an awful lot for your confidence in terms of going to those exams. Even if you're not necessarily targeting the absolute top grades, this should enable you to make good headway in terms of accessing a respectable and great grade at GCSE history without having to know every single thing underneath the sun. So that's it from me for today, folks. Hope you found it useful, and check out the other videos that I'm going to put on, which again I hope you're going to use and give us feedback as well on that if you want. Take care, all the best.